All right, so thank you all for joining us. Paul and I were in the Research and Equity Office. Paul is our IT business tech and also a longstanding college researcher. And I'm currently the interim director of Research and Equity. And we're housed in the Division of Institutional Equity and Research and Planning. So in the time that we have together, we hope to be able to cover a few objectives that we help you understand the changes we made to program review. And most of this will look new to you if you're brand new to the system or the CRC. So welcome also for our new members of CRCA. Our Dean of ACDT has joined us. Dean Mishra is here. Understand how research and equity will provide support to your program review completion. We'll also demo the system for you and help you understand the changes that we continue to make in the system. So just so we're all in the same page with the jargon or terminology we refer to at CRC, CIPS is our college integrated planning system. It's where we house our assessment of outcomes, our program review. We've recently added our resource request forms for our capital outlay budget resource allocation process. And we've also have it for our unit plan segment. Program review is where is conducted in SIPs, and I mentioned earlier with unit planning and also outcomes assessment. But today we're just going to focus on program review. So our work to reconstruct program review started with the program review cycle. Previous to spring 2020, program review was done on a 4-year cycle with every 2 year, a midterm in every 2 years. So really what that felt like for the college was that we were doing program review every 2 years. And that was really difficult. And also the ability to do it meaningfully and with a lot of review and evaluation and planning every 2 years was a lot of effort across more than 100 programs, including administrative and student service programs. And so in the Institutional Effectiveness Committee, in the program review subcommittee, we first began with focused on a staggered 6-year cycle that would allow us to provide support and respond to the timely and meaningful completion of program review by both the CACs and non-instructional programs. And so we randomized the scheduling across from, I believe it was fall 2020 through, sorry, I'm like thinking on the fly. I'm trying to think, I think it's spring 26. And that will be our 6-year cycle. Our last full program review was fall 2019. And so that's why we began with the 6-year cycle that started in fall 2020. We randomized the selection of which programs would go first and allowing for larger areas like SBS and SME, and I believe Health and Human Services to occupy a whole academic year. So they would go both in fall and spring just because there were too many programs to try to support in one term. So that was approved. We vetted that through the participatory governance process, and that went into effect. And then following that, we also redesigned and deconstructed program review template for in SIPs. So again, with the program review subcommittee, we reviewed all of the previous sections in the old program review, reviewed its purpose, evaluated how well users understood the purpose and how well it served the point of evaluation, and if it was going to contribute to anything. So we really did a critical breakdown of what's the purpose, how do we improve it and get a more meaningful output, and how do we also help provide ample support to understanding kind of the differences between the resources also identified in program review as part of planning. So really a real critical lens to deconstruct that and design it for improvement. And then we presented those changes to Academic Senate in fall 2020. So the first cohorts that we have, and I know we're using acronyms, so I'll say what they are and then the letters. So English Language Studies was the first area CAC to go to complete program review, followed by Business Computer Science, and then this past term, Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources, AFNR. And at each time we conduct an evaluation and we continue to make changes. So even in this past year, we made changes to program review to simplify the learning outcomes section so that it wasn't redundant to what was being all the effort in the assessment reporting that was done for the outcomes in the assessment reporting part of our program, of our integrated planning system. So really help them just synthesize, okay, what are the main actions that you're going to take based on your outcomes that you've reported. And then this spring, we'll be working with automotive construction design technology to support their timely completion of program review as well. So in addition to this training, we will do a follow-up training with specifically with ACDT department chairs and the dean. So as I mentioned earlier, we continue, just like we support and say espouse continuous improvement as an institution, we reflect that as well with even program review. So as I mentioned earlier, we continue to evaluate our goals for improvement, or how do we clarify the expectations of what you all have to respond to in program review? How do we continue to improve the user experience? How can we make transparent what the process is and what happens next with your program review, and timely communication about deadlines and application of what you put in your program review and how that then informs resource allocation. Okay, so on this side, we talk about really what does our office do? And so our research team really coordinates every semester with every area, like gives you communication ahead of time. Hey, you're up for program review. We let you know we're going to provide training. And then there's additional available one-on-one meetings with our faculty researchers, kind of going through and looking at your data. We provide a lot of assistance in that area, because in part of the program review, we embed our Hawk Dash tools that provide you with enrollment and student success data. And that's also available to be disaggregated. It's trend data, so it's the last 5 years. And so with that, we help try to interpret that, because we know that's our daily grind. That's where, why we're here to provide that support. And we just try to help you identify like what are the key observations happening. And in part that helps you focus more on how you respond. We help you save time with the analysis so that you can spend more time determining, okay, what's the course of action our program wants to take for continuous improvement in our area. So before we jump into a demo that Paul's going to lead, I just wanted to pause to see if I went through anything too quickly, if you wanted me to circle back to another area of the kind of background and purpose of program review. And if not, then I'll pass it on to Paul. No? All right, Paul, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Just an FYI, I think I'm having some internet issues. So if I lag out or whatever, people are frozen right now. So just let me know if you can't hear me or whatever is going on.
Okay, maybe that'll help if we just through the demo, move slowly through each section and check in before we go to the next section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
We'll do that. Okay, so the first thing, let me go ahead and share my screen. We're going to go to the CRC homepage so I can show you where you can actually log into program review. And I'm going to turn off my video too, because that might help a little bit with my internet. And so if you've never actually logged into the SIP system, which is understandable, what you would do is from the homepage, you would go to employees. And then you go to employee login, and then you click on SIPs. And this is going to take you to the College Integrated Planning System, otherwise abbreviated as SIPs or CIPS. That was in the definitions in the beginning of the slides. And typically you would have to log in, but I logged in earlier. You would just use your WID and password. If you haven't been granted access to the SIP system, we tried to, I think at the end of fall, we gave everybody batch access to the system, but some people may have been missed. So if you were missed and you can't log in or you can't edit the program review you typically do, you just email me, and I typically do it in about 5 minutes from receiving that email. So just let me know. And what's going to happen after you log in is you're going to come to this homepage. And one of the big pieces of feedback we received was with regards to program review was that deadlines were often not clearly communicated. And so one of the things you see on this very front page is a table of the deadlines for program review for each term. So if you wanted to know, and we've got it out to 2023 here, so we'll have to update that eventually. But For the spring 2022 semester, you can see the deadlines for program review. So editors would complete their program review by 4/20/2022. And they would get their feedback from their managers by May 4th, and then finalized by May 18th. And then we would publish those or take a snapshot of them by August 20th in our office. So you can see the deadlines here. And another thing too on this page is it kind of unpacks the various aspects of planning and program review that we have at the college, from the really granular level of assessment reporting, so looking at your classes, to program review, looking at your program, to the unit for planning for your unit, as well as planning for the entire college, which is our strategic plan. And actually we have a flex workshop on that later today as well, if you want to join us. And the other thing too that you'll see is if you're assigned as an editor, you should see your program listed here, so you can just quickly go to it. But if you don't see that and you are an editor, let me know, because we should fix that. Okay, so like Sabrina said, basically today we're just going to focus on program review. There's lots of aspects in the college integrated planning system that we could cover, but today it's just about program review. So what I'm going to do is go to the program review tab and click on that. And hopefully my internet is working. I'm going to click. There we go. Okay, my internet's very slow right now. And I'm going to go down to the sandbox version of the instructional program review just for demonstration. But if you wanted to see where your program was, you can see that these programs are all divided out by terms. So you can log in here later and see and anticipate when you're going to be conducting program review based off of that random assignment process that Sabrina described earlier. But I'm just going to go down to our demonstration program review, which is right here at the bottom. And if you're an editor of program review, what you would do is you'd find your program. This is my program right here, and I'm going to click on edit. And similar to the previous program reviews, you're going to see this status page as soon as you click on edit. And this is going to tell you what work you've completed and what work is in progress, and then which areas have been reviewed by your area manager or dean and which haven't. So for example, this first section, program description and purpose, it's currently in progress and it hasn't been reviewed by a manager. Okay, but one thing that you'll notice that is pretty different from the previous program reviews is that the number of sections is vastly simplified. So we used to have sections and they were labeled, section 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and then there was like 2A, 2B, 2C. So now we just have 6 sections. And generally speaking, you want to work from the top to the bottom in the navigation pane here on the left-hand side. And if you ever wanted to go back to see your program review status, you could just click on the program review status, program completion status here at the top. And so the first thing that you do is describe your program. And then you talk about the findings from your outcomes assessments, so the assessments of your courses, the assessments of your program. Then you look at some program data, and you consider the impacts of the things you've already done in the last program review cycle, review your responses, and then plan for the future. So it's just those 6 things, and you typically work top to bottom. It makes more sense that way anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and just go into each link and just give you a brief overview of what happens within each section. And then I can take questions at any time too. So feel free to put your questions in chat or just raise your hand.
While you're navigating to the first section, Paul, I would like to just add, I know they wrote this in the chat, but just for those, manager review is not an approval or disapproval. It's really just a review and an opportunity for your supervisor or area dean to provide feedback on how you've responded if they have anything to add. And it's more of an assurance that they've reviewed what you've put in your program review and have that opportunity to provide feedback, because we did receive in our evaluations in the past request that be a part of program review. So they knew, really understanding where your program review was in the process. And in addition to having the deadlines, understanding if your area supervisor or dean had an opportunity to read it, and that you would know they did, because they would indicate that on the in their view of your program review. There's an ability for them to check the box that they've reviewed it, and an opportunity to provide feedback should they want to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think part of the previous criticism of program review is that you just do all this planning, then it just sits on a shelf. So this is a good way of facilitating the conversation between you and your dean and communicating, these are the plans that we made, these are the conclusions that we made about our program. So it's not just like doing this program review, just do it. It's about planning for your program and having that conversation as well. So that's part of the facilitation, is adding that review part. So I'm going to go into the first section here, program description and purpose. Okay, and you can see if you were a program editor, you could see your manager feedback on top later when they've come in and reviewed it. I've just put in this section, looks great. So the first question that you're going to answer as an editor is your program a CTE program? And if you click yes, and the current program review cohort is generally CTE programs. So if you click yes, you'll actually get CTE specific questions throughout the program review, in addition to some just general questions that we ask all programs. So one example of that is if you have an advisory board. This is the next question. If you have an advisory board, who participates on the board, and when does that board meet? If I actually change this to no, you can see that question disappears, because it wouldn't be relevant to a program that doesn't have an advisory board like CTE programs typically do. Okay, and then the rest of this is you describe who's actually completing program review. And this is going to be helpful to a lot of people, because some feedback we used to receive was, I don't know who did program review the last time. I don't really know what to do with the information that's already in here. This creates that historical record of who completed program review, so that we can look back and kind of figure out why it was done the way it was. And then you describe your program, and then you describe how your program supports the college mission and vision and values. And then this is, if you don't take anything away from me today, this is a lot, so you might not take a lot of it away, but the most important thing that I'm going to tell you is when you're doing program review, there's this save button on the bottom of most of the sections. Make sure that you scroll down and click that save button before you move on to the next section. That is the most important thing I can tell you today. In the past, what we used to do is have it auto save every time it detected a change. But that actually created quite a bit of memory issues when there was a lot of people logged onto the server. It's very memory intensive to do that type of check. And so it made the user experience worse to do that. So now we're requiring people to click the save button. And so that is the most important thing I can tell you today in terms of program review. Okay.
So before you move on from this section, Paul, I would like to scroll down to the bottom. If you all managed to see that uploading supporting documents, part of what when we were presenting the changes to constituencies, one of the feedback we got was, how do I really share my story, or kind of provide some artifact of what occurred in this cycle? If I had a brochure about my program, I wanted to upload anything that would really be unique to telling your story as a program. And so one of the requests we got was its ability to upload a document or any PDF attachment. And this is really with the purpose of allowing those who are the program review editors and completing this, how you want to tell your story as a program in this section. What is important to know, or anything that might have been produced in an artifact that you'd like to attach to your program review. And really this again helps with the next program review. If someone was reviewing it and wanted to see, who did it last time? What was the program structured like before? What were they focused on? And maybe an example, like these are all kind of supporting kind of this at this time that you are engaging in program review, what's occurred, like helping you kind of formulate what's happening in your program at the time in which you do program review.
Yeah, thanks, Marina. So the next thing that you would want to do is if you actually completed your section, you could mark it complete. And just to show you what that does, we go back into the program completion status, and you can see that that's been marked complete. Lauren, what's up?
So I have a question about how the uploading of documents may or may not be utilized. If, for example, your department was impacted by the pandemic and all your course rotations are seriously out of whack, like I could totally see wanting to document like, oh, this is how we used to do things in the before times. Who looks at, you know what I mean? Like, because now I'm thinking of it like, oh, this will be a great like kind of folder to put stuff that's going to be long term as we get our computers swapped out in our offices and all this kind of stuff. So is that something that, you know, our manager is going to care about, that we have old course rotations in there? Or, you know, I'm just trying to like think about how it could be utilized for,
Well, you know, it might
when there's big changes like global pandemic.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. If you're planning, you know, we're doing a program. Excuse me. Now we're doing a program that's a program review that's every 6 years. So it could be very useful to, you know, you and in the next 6 years, or whoever's doing it in the next 6 years, to have that kind of context. So just that aspect of it, I think, would be useful. Whether or not your manager will look at it, I can't tell you if they'll do it or not. It would be nice if they looked at that kind of context.
Our history, I might be 5 managers in 4 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's fine, yeah.
So but it is there for them to look at if they want to. So you know, if you want to do that, I mean, I would fully encourage that. So
okay, thank you.
Okay, so then the next section. So we've just gotten through describing your program. And then in the next section, what you're going to do is talk about how your program assessments, the assessments of your courses and the assessments of your program are going to inform what you're going to do in the future. So this section actually used to be way more complicated, and it was really redundant with the assessment reporting system. So now it's just 2 boxes. The first asks, considering all the completed PSLO assessments, so the assessments of your program by you and your colleagues, please describe your general findings and any intended changes. So basically, you're going to look at your assessments that you've submitted over the years of your program and be like, oh, it seems like these assessments that me and my colleagues have submitted seem to imply that X, Y, and Z need to be changed, or X, Y, and Z are going well, and therefore we're going to do something because of these assessments. And, you know, there's a lot of submitting these assessments. Some of that is about accreditation, but some of that is about thinking about your program and seeing what needs to be improved and reflecting on your program. And here's where you kind of write down what you're going to change as a result of those assessments. And then the next question is, considering all of the completed CSLO assessments, so those are your course SLO assessments, please describe your general findings and any intended changes. And so that's what you do in that section. You're just thinking about your course assessments and planning for the future if they have any implications about changes. And then again, the most important thing here is click save so that you don't lose your work after you've written your insights into these 2 dialog boxes.
One neat feature that we added to these, it's probably more of technical than programmatic, is that, you know, when you start writing and your entry starts to get long, you may feel like you can't see what you've written. If you drag the little corner on the right-hand side of the box, the bottom right corner, you can expand the box. So you can kind of see everything you wrote. If you need to shrink it, you can. But that allows you to kind of, you know, I don't know how you feel, but I'd like to see everything I wrote just in case I missed something or I repeated myself. And sometimes it's not easy to do that if it's in a small, what appears to be a small text box. So we just wanted to share that. Whenever you see the 3 little lines in the corner, that box is expandable.
Okay, so you can see that we've spent a lot of time observing people as they go through program review, talking to people as they go through program review, and we really take this into account. I mean, the system is always going to have to grow and change, but you know, I've talked about the save button, but the other thing here that's important is that we've actually listened to some of the things that you've told us and some of the things that were confusing, and we've tried to incorporate that in as best as we could. Okay, so once you've described your program and talked about your program review, or your outcomes assessments findings, then you can look at some program data. And in this section, basically what we've done is we've provided a couple of dashboards, and a lot of you are familiar with the Hawk Dash at this point. Basically, this is just the Hawk Dash within each section. And then using the data from the Hawk Dash, you answer questions about your program. So there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tabs across the top. If you're not a CTE program, you actually won't see the CTE data tab. And you would go through and respond to each of these sections regarding data of your program. And before I go through the questions, I'm going to go through it quickly because there's a few of them. This is an area where we do a lot of one-on-one support. So part of the reason why we've staggered out the programs is because, when it was 100-something programs going at once, yet, I couldn't support every program and this detailed analysis of their data. But now we do it across the term. We sit down with you, we go through program review with you. And this is the biggest contribution that we can give you, is looking at your data and helping you interpret your data so it's not so overwhelming. So the first tab for this data section is enrollment trends. And so you can see a dashboard here for your enrollment. And then if you wanted to look for your specific program, you'd click on an academic program, and then you would select a program. I'm just going to select a bunch of random ones. And you can see it filters by your program enrollment data. It takes a second there, probably because my internet's really slow right now. And then you can even break this down by demographics. You can look fall, spring. And so what you do when you look at your enrollment data, which again, we can help you do, is you're asked to describe the trends in your overall enrollment. Look at whether or not a student group is underrepresented or overrepresented. And I'll show you how to do that in the dashboard. And then really brainstorm about what factors, programmatic, institutional, or external, might contribute to underrepresentation that you found within your program. So really reflecting here on why the demographics in your program might be different from the demographics college-wide. So it's just a reflective exercise. The Hawk Dash can't tell you why those things exist, but it's just a matter of reflection in this circumstance. So if you want to actually see whether or not a particular group was over or underrepresented, you could actually, so I've already selected my programs here. I'm just going to look at fall, and then I'm going to pick a particular demographic group, let's say age. And you can see once you pick age, this little option pops up that says evaluate equity. And so if I click on yes, we've actually changed this slightly. So what that does is it takes the representation of that group in your program. So the percentage representation, for example, let's say you had 55% students over the age of 25 in your program. And it subtracts the representation of that group college-wide. So let's say that was like 40% college-wide. That means you would have you would have an overrepresentation of 15%. So 55 minus 40 is 15. And then a negative number means it's underrepresented relative to the college-wide. So for example, amongst the programs here, and even if you mouse over the bars, it describes this for you. It says this group constituted 23.4% of students in the selected programs and 36.1% of the students college-wide. So that gap would be minus 12.8. And so that's kind of where you're getting underrepresentation. And those are the groups that I think it's important to reflect on in terms of, are there any barriers to the students accessing the program? Is there something else going on, et cetera, et cetera? And that's really the main purpose of this exercise of looking at these data. Okay, so once you get through your enrollment trends, you can look at your course success trends, which operates very much the same way. We ask you about whether or not the program's course success is stable, declining, or increasing. Consider how your program contributes to the long-term goal of the college. And then look at online course success rates. This is something that's been particularly relevant recently. And then which student groups perform below the average success rate, and then of course to reflect on why certain student groups might be above or below the average success rate. Okay, and then you consider your degree and certificate data, and we're actually building a dashboard for this right now. So there'll be another dashboard that's embedded right here. But for the time being, you can look at a PDF that we upload and update that's linked right here for awards data. Okay, and then this section is for CTE programs. So this is where you can discuss your labor market information. If you have any labor market information, or if you gather that information as a CTE program, you can discuss it here. And I should say, as you're navigating through these tabs, before you go to the next tab, click Save. I'm going to say that a million times. We're doing this. Before you go to the next tab, click Save. Okay, and then finally, data conclusions. This is where, you know, considering all of the data that you've looked at in the last 4 tabs here, you kind of draw your general conclusions about what your program is doing well, what your program needs to improve, and sort of like think about some improvements that you might make. So the first thing is you list any additional data. This is this first question. And then the second question is, how does your program intend to respond to equity gaps and improve overall course success given your review of your program's data? This is where you would list sort of your response or reflections upon the data that you've reviewed.
Again, the ability to upload a report.
Save.
Say you have a survey, you can, or a report, or you wanted to upload perhaps an external study done, anything that can be uploaded that's PDF, you could attach here that you're referencing as a data point that's informing how you want to improve your program based on the data.
Okay, so just to review at this point, we've gone through the program description, you've talked about the findings from your outcomes assessments, looked at some program data, and then the final part of the review portion of this program review is to look at the things that you've done over the past few years and consider their impact. So I'm going to go into section 4 here.
So section 4 really allows us to close the loop on your strategies and resources. This has been a difficult area that we'd spent a lot of time in design mode trying to improve that experience and be transparent about what's happening and the purpose of this area. Paul's going to go over each section, but hopefully you'll see how this is, every element of the first 4 sections is technically a data point, right? And all of it is supposed to help inform what you plan to do next. And just wanted to kind of highlight that everything here is about reviewing what your data looked like, what your program was like, what you found in your outcomes and learning outcomes, what did you try last? Did it work? Do you still want to continue? Did you implement? Were there barriers? Really helping you do a full comprehensive review from all those aspects.
Yeah, exactly. So this section, basically, you're considering the resources you got, the strategies that you implemented. If you've done program review before these changes, you might recall that those strategies used to be called action items. We thought strategies is probably a better term for it. And so in this section, you kind of review the impacts of implementing those things. So the first thing you do is consider whether or not previous resources had an impact on your program. And so you'll see the resources that you've listed in the past that you needed. You might have quite this many that you needed to implement your action items or strategies. And you're going to go through each one and say, let's see, this first one, COB training resource. Let's see, I haven't gotten that one yet, so I'm going to leave that one open. This newest resource, I got that one, so I'm going to go closed, obtained, and then it's going to ask you, how did this impact your program? And you're just going to describe the impact. I'm going to write generally here because there's no point in writing a lot. And you click save.
For the purpose of the demo. There should be something meaningful.
For the purpose of the demo, you should write something meaningful, obviously. You should meaningfully reflect on the resources you've obtained. And the other two things that you could select are closed, no longer needed, and that's going to prompt a dialog box as well. And then delete, which you should only really use if it's like something that was misspecified or duplicated, or something that you ultimately just entered incorrectly, is really what that should be used for. And those completed resources or closed resources are moved to this table at the bottom with your description of the impacts of the resources. Okay, so you've considered your resources that you've obtained, and then considering the previous strategies that you planned to do, it's largely the same. You go through each of the strategies that you considered doing in the last program review cycle and either say they're not completed, or no longer a strategy, and respond to the prompts in terms of the impacts of completing a particular strategy. So if I marked this first strategy, change my program complete, it would ask again, what's the impact of that strategy? Okay, so, and if you're wondering where these things come from, they actually come from the planning for the future section, but we'll discuss that in a moment. So let's walk through the last couple of tabs here. The next is just a few prompts about internal factors. The first thing is that you might have noticed that some of the resources that you've listed were not obtained, and some of the previous strategies that you listed probably were not completed at this point. And so this first question gives you an opportunity to reflect on why that might be the case. Why like certain resources aren't available, why certain strategies couldn't be achieved. You can talk about barriers that you've encountered. You can talk about other factors and other unplanned things, etc. So this gives you a chance to reflect on the not completed strategies and resources. In the next question, you talk about other accomplishments that you didn't necessarily plan for. So one accomplishment that's probably going to be in a lot of program reviews that a lot of people didn't plan for is moving to the remote environment and being able to instruct students in the remote environment during a pandemic. So that might be one thing. That's one example of an achievement that you may not have planned for over the last few years that would end up in your program review. And then the next thing is talking about how your program is interconnected with other programs, with other programs in the district, at the institution, other areas at the college, just kind of reflecting on how siloed your program is versus, interactive with other areas of the institution. And click Save. Okay. So the next tab is CTE data, and this is where you can talk about the recommendations of the advisory board. So if you have any recommendations from your advisory board, this is a good spot to summarize them. And then describing the resulting actions as a result of your advisory board advice. And click Save. And then finally, you can talk about some external factors, as well as general conclusions from this area overall. So what challenges and external factors have impacted or are currently impacting your program? And then finally, given the challenges and accomplishments described above, how do you intend to respond as a program? So this says described above, but that really means like throughout this whole section, given the challenges and accomplishments you've described, how are you going to respond as a program? And this can be, we identified this one barrier, this one area where we didn't plan so well, or it could be we're doing this one thing pretty well and we want to keep doing that. So just kind of like this holistic approach about what do you intend to do with your program now that you've reviewed what you did over the last program review cycle. Okay, and then click Save once you're done there. And so really what I've done here is I've gone through the 4 sections where you're reviewing your program, you describe it, you look at your outcomes assessment data, you look at your program data, and you look at all of the things you've done. And at this point, you've done a lot of reflection. And so you should have a good sense of kind of what you want to do with your program going forward. So you're almost ready to plan, but in the next section, what you want to do is just do one final review of your responses. So I'm going to click on Review Your Responses. And what you do here in this section is pretty straightforward, is you look through all your responses, and things have to be completed in order to be able to mark this section complete. And then you click on, I have reviewed my responses and now I'm ready to plan, and then click save.
So really what we hope this is, the purpose of this section was, in isolation, each one is broken out into a segment, and then you move on and then you switch lens and you look at your outcomes, then you move on and you look at your data, then you move on and you look at your strategies. So really what we hope to accomplish with this, two things. One, put all of that information in one place for you to really review and kind of synthesize in one spot, being able to review all of your entries and see what that story is telling. What is really a common theme? Secondarily, one of the things we hope to accomplish with the redesign of program review is really support group dialogue in departments. So one of the things that this tool serves is an ability for you to share with your colleagues, here's kind of in totality our responses thus far. Let's have a conversation about it. Was anything missed in our program that wasn't reflected? And really support that dialogue, not only with your colleagues, but also perhaps with your dean. So again, this we thought that this is like almost like a preview, so to speak, before you get into planning. So we hope that it is a useful section in program review, given that you've done so much reflection and responding to the first 4 sections. We thought it best to provide you with a snapshot of all of that effort before you go into planning.
Right, exactly. It's really because there's just a lot of stuff that you go through in terms of the reflection on your program. So it's a good spot for you to review the conclusions that you've made and the things that you want to do before you go into the planning section. So basically, the last thing that you have to do is go into the planning for the future section. And this is the area where you actually specify your plans based off of the data that you've reviewed. And so one thing to consider here is that in the previous program review, first you specified these things called action items, and then you went into the next section and you specified the resources that you wanted to complete those action items. So we've simplified that process. All of that is now in one section. And to demonstrate that, you can see, for example, this particular resource at the top that says change my program. You've got a description and it says action expected within the next 3 to 5 years, and it's not completed. And then underneath that, you see a list of resources used to or required to achieve that particular strategy. So at this point, we've made the strategies and the resources more explicitly linked so that people understand, I'm describing resources to achieve the things that I'm planning to do. And it also makes it so that you don't have to click back and forth between sections to kind of understand what's going on. It's all right there in one visual spot.
And in the past, what we also observed in entries were that action steps were also being identified as resources. So we were trying to, and despite however we were trying to explain it, just continued to not make sense or be very transparent about the difference between the two. And so to help clarify the purpose between the strategy, and that's why we use different labeling and try to use strategic planning language in program review, like a strategy, and the resources is to help make it apparent, here is the action step or strategy you want to use. And again, here are the resources that contribute to the success of that strategy to avoid any redundancy in what's being submitted as your plan for improvement.
Yeah, so basically, if you wanted to specify a new high level strategy, so if you want to implement a plan in the coming years after reviewing all of this data, what you do is click on add a new strategy, and you give it a title and you provide a description. You link that strategy to aspects of the strategic plan, and that helps us with our evaluation of the strategic plan. And then finally, you just click save and that will show up in the list. So I am going to just do an example one. So in the list, the strategies are alphabetized in case you're wondering where it's going to show up. So I'm putting a strategy so it shows up near the top. I go ahead and click save. You can see that my strategy has now been created. And then I'm going to need some resources to complete this particular strategy. So I'm going to click on add a resource underneath that strategy. And here's another area where we've tried to simplify the process. So you're going to put in a title and a description. I just definitely spelled that wrong, but not going to correct it. And then you're going to select a type. So you select sort of the type of resource that you think best fits into it. This is just a little important piece of information. Maybe these two things can be pasted in the chat as well. So we are going to be going through a COB cycle. And if you wanted your resources from this section to go into the resource request forms, the two things that go into the COB cycle are IT and technology-based AV equipment and other furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. So those two options get pulled into the COB cycle. So if this is something that you would eventually want to submit as a resource request, which we're not necessarily covering in this training, those are the two items that get filtered through to the COB cycle. Okay, and then you would describe how this supports the strategy, and then describe the essentialness of the particular resource for implementing the strategy, and then describe whether or not it's a new thing or something that is a replacement or just something that's already a utilization of existing program resources. So we click save. Once we're done describing that, and you can see that that resource is now listed underneath the strategy. Okay, so while we're on the topic of resources and COB cycle, the other thing that you want to do is make sure that you have action expected within 2 years on your strategy, so that gets ported into the COB cycle as well. So those are the things, if you want those resources to show up in the resource request forms later on, you would want those two aspects to be filled out like that. But in general, as you're doing this as you're doing this program review exercise, it shouldn't just be about the resources you want to put into the COB cycle. It should be about planning for the future and thinking about what you want to do with your program beyond just getting resources out of the COB cycle. So think about what you've done with your program, add strategies, change strategies, add resources that you would need hypothetically to complete those strategies, even if they're not going to enter into a resource allocation process at the moment.
Another opportunity for you to review your strategy. So say after you've completed section 4 and you go in and you see that you still have some strategies showing up that you didn't, perhaps you wanted to review or mark complete. That action is still active here. So if Paul wanted to update the completion status of a strategy that he didn't mention before, you would use the drop-down menu, click on complete or no longer a strategy, and the same thing, it would you would be prompted, I believe, or we need to fix that. Be prompted.
Yeah, that should be.
It should prompt a response of, "Oh, I completed the strategy," and then when you click save it, then moves it down.
I'm not sure what's going on with that. It should be doing that.
So we'll let Christina, our web programmer, know that that's not entirely working as programmed. But that's usually an extra follow-up, which then would also update in section 4 for you as well. It would update that list of completed or not completed or barriers experience kind of strategy update, what's impacting your strategy. That would happen in section 4 as well. So we try to think about the different spaces where you might be thinking or no longer realizing you want to change a past strategy that you thought you were going to keep. And then after reviewing all your planning item or your data at that section 5, you get into planning 6 and you're like, actually, that strategy doesn't work. I'm going to remove it or I'm going to edit it. So you can do all of that here. It's there's a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to update your plans for how you want to improve your program in the next 6 years. For programs that are not scheduled for program review this semester, one of the things we want to make sure we communicate is program review is open all the time. The way we enforce the deadlines is using timestamps. So taking snapshots of what's in the system by the deadline. So that enables users to continue to work in program review and capture things that are happening, especially for programs that want to articulate plans and strategies that may not be under program review. You can get into this section. I specify strategies and resources you need in order to be for those to show up in the COB process if that's what's important at the moment for you. So we definitely didn't want to make this you're locked out, you can't get in, and create a barrier, but we do want to enforce deadlines for transparency and accountability on both ends of the user and also of the designers. So hopefully that's clear and folks feel supported getting in. That was a change we made as well, again, based on feedback, like, just to demonstrate, we do, evaluation has clearly, definitely purpose, and we've tried to apply listen and reflect and reply to and respond to the, the feedback we get when we evaluate program review. It is meaningful, and we do on our end, and we hope to use it to improve your experience completing program review, so it makes sense and it connects the dots for you in terms of the goal of program review is for continuous improvement. How do we demonstrate that in each section?
Okay.
Lauren has her hand raised.
Lauren, what's up?
So I was trying to follow along while you were doing things and looking at program review for my department. And we have some cross-listed classes with other departments or with other even CACs where our classes between like computer information science and journalism, or we're with journalism and those kind of things. So how do those, because it looked like I had edit privileges for my normal department and then also departments where I have cross-listed classes. Is that just ladies and gentlemen agreement between the departments
Well,
who go in and tweak stuff, or?
No, if you're not supposed to have editing privileges, let us know.
Okay.
So what we did is we go to the website and we use like chair information from the website. So some of that could just be inaccurate. And so if you haven't edited something in the past, don't consider it as like, oh, I can just go in and edit this now that I have edit privileges. Make sure to check in with
but
your
like
colleagues.
At the same time, we have some cross-listed classes that typically my department does not staff. So I have no data on success rates for courses or any of that kind of stuff. So
Gotcha.
I would be A-okay with another department doing the assessments for those pieces of it. So, but AME is a little ways out. So I'm sure I'll bug you closer to that time.
Yeah.
And cross-listed assessments, I mean, that gets back to the assessment reporting part of it all is definitely the cross-listed courses and assessment has been one that's been less kind of like black and white, so to speak, in terms of whose assessments, is this assessed in a timely manner? If the cross-listed course is assessed, does that mean that the course it's cross-listed with also gets checked off as being assessed, right? And that again is something we'll want to co-design or review with our student learning outcomes coordinator. And again, that's something we hope to improve as well. The entire SIP system, we're trying to make things more transparent, more purposeful, connect the dots across planning and have it really demonstrate an integrated planning system. But it's also very tricky. So within the ability of the technology we have, how well we do that is really, also important to have that feedback from colleagues. So cross-listed, making a note of it on the assessment side shouldn't happen on the program review end. And again, like you said, Lauren, focusing in on the courses that you all do staff in terms of faculty and teach and how those relate to your program and how you want to improve, like say, your area, that's definitely within the scope of the program review editor. But just to piggyback on that, when I think one of the iterations downstream that, now that you've mentioned it, is how do we help support cross dialogue between CACs or departments who have cross-listed courses and how their cross-listed courses support each other's programs for timely completion and transfer or degree, certificate, etc. Again, the goal is to help encourage group dialogue. It doesn't have to be confined within a department. Do we have slides after the demo, Paul? I think we do, right? Just a few.
Oh yeah, that's right. We do. Just checking out here.
I just wanted to say this looks so much like easier to follow than the first time I had to do it. It was a horrifyingly traumatic experience the first time I had to do program review. Stuff linked to things that told me I wasn't allowed to move ahead until I did assessments on classes that were course listed that I didn't have data for. I just sat in my office and cried. So this looks so much better, guys. So good job.
That's good. We took that part where you scheduled the assessments and stuff. Like, I don't know if you remember that. Some people actually use that. and it's still available in the archive system. But so if you want to use it, it's still there. I can send you a link to do it. But a lot of people just looked at it and were like, I don't know what this means. And it was just not a very useful exercise for some people. So
we tried to get rid of things that were
completely gone. Yeah.
Yeah. The other aspect of that is we tried to keep assessment in assessment. So one of the things for, especially this is really important when we might have, and I apologize that we skipped over this. If you hadn't seen program review since the last time you've done program review, you'll notice program outcomes is deleted, obsolete, no longer applicable in program review itself. We found it entirely problematic that instructional programs created a separate set of program learning outcomes in program review, and then we're asked to assess it when it's not in catalog. So we try to simplify this and have you focus only on what's in catalog, only what your award PSLOs are. But that also means that you're probably gonna have to spend some time ahead of your program review, reviewing your PSLOs and completing assessments, if you hadn't done those before, because in the past, when program review first iterated and Socrates, we've done a lot of work to import data from Socrates, especially in the assessment area. That's been a bit of a huge lift on behalf of Paul and Christina Okront, our web programmer, our web developer, is trying to find a way to connect the dots with Socrates when it comes to curriculum. So that, program student learning outcomes, you probably were comfortable evaluating or got comfortable using the program outcomes that were defined in program review, but your students never saw those unless they went to the wonky web page where we exported all of your program outcomes and published them in a PDF with your program student learning outcomes, and it just became a redundant heavy lift, and we didn't know why we were doing it and why we were asking you to do it. So we decided, let's get rid of it. It has no purpose and it creates double work and it's not in catalog. Why would you assess those? So focusing back on your program student learning outcomes. And again, part of it was it predated PSLOs being in catalog or being in Socrates. So we're trying to bring things up to speed, connect the dots, have you do outcomes assessment for only your CSLOs and PSLOs as articulated in your outcomes. And after this segment, I'm only speaking on this, especially because we have a lot of time left in our session, is assessment reporting. It also is an area we're trying to improve, make clear, improve the user experience, and support your interaction with that. And make clear when you're out of cycle. So again, trying to make sure we don't fall behind on those every 6 years, you're assessing your student learning outcomes for both your PSLOs and your CSLOs. So if you need help with that, that is also an area that we try to support in collaboration and support of our SLO coordinator, Rhonda Farley's role. So we know that's a heavy across the campus lift with PSLOs, given this change to program review. But yeah. Just wanted to clarify in case you were like, what happened to program outcomes? They didn't have a purpose outside of program review, and it's unfair to create those for instruction when you already had PSLOs. All right, so we're gonna open this up now.
Okay. Well, yeah, we got
Oh,
slides.
wait, we have slides, that's right. See, now I forgot what I even said. Thanks, Paul.
Okay. So just to reiterate, for programs conducting program review this semester, which is ACDT, so if you're in that CAC, here are your deadlines. So April 20th is when you should have your program review completed, and then managers can comment on it by May 4th, and then final revisions by May 18th, which is the end of the semester. They're also listed in the SIPS system. So we'll have a follow-up training with ACDT as well to reiterate these deadlines as much as possible.
We'll also edit the slide before we put it in Canvas so that May 4th, 2022 doesn't show up. We had Paul, we have a December.
Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah.
Right. No worries.
Let's take this out.
Real time editing behind the scenes.
Okay, so and then there's some other things going on. So spring 21, we started working with the resource committee on unit planning and the COB process, and you're going to see some of those changes in the COB process that's happening this semester. So you'll see some of those changes, and Sabrina could probably speak more to that than I can. And then, of course, we're always working on continuous improvements. So we're looking at assessment reporting and strategic planning, and then making the unit plan an actual plan beyond just the resources that people submit to the COB ITMB process. So there's a few things that are going beyond program review that we're continuously improving. And then we'll just take questions and take your feedback. So any questions, comments, just let us know.
And just a plug, there is a COB at 2 o'clock overview in case you were interested in attending. It's at 2 p.m. Check our Flex schedule for that. Teresa Tena, Katie DeLeon, and Dave Andrews, the tri-chairs of the Resources Committee, will be reviewing the COB process and communicating deadlines and steps to make sure your COB items make it into the unit plan for prioritization, which then goes to the Resources Committee for further prioritization, which then goes to the president for the final decision, just to summarize that process really quickly. Any questions, comments, or concerns, or maybe we went over a section too quickly that you'd like us to revisit?
Thank you guys. I came in late, but I saw what I needed. So thank you so much. Thank you.
And if you have any questions, you can email us afterwards too. We're always available. We need your feedback to improve this system to get it to the point where it's a useful exercise for you and it's not confusing. And it's not frustrating. So those are things that we should learn about. So yeah, that's the email. And then again, if you can't access it, if you don't have editing privileges, let me know. I can give you that. So. Any other questions, concerns? Well, in the past, these meetings used to go over because there was so much feedback that we got about program review. So I guess this is nice. But if you have anything else, just let us know. And I guess we can.
You guys got rid of all those awful subheadings. So see how that cleaned it up? We gave you back the gift of time.
Yes. Yeah, that was a lot of, I have to give credit to our program review subcommittee. We, I think that include, I want to say our anthropology professor, Cassandra Gilmore, SME faculty, I believe chemistry. Oh my goodness, why are the
Mike
names?
Russell.
Mike
Russell's
Russell,
on there. Mm-hmm.
Rhonda Farley, Christina O'Krant, Paul, and myself. You know, really just having hard conversations and learning to let go of what's not working and what really wasn't feeding a meaningful program review. And, you know, and so far the feedback has been good, but and also just demonstrating that the feedback of what wasn't working, like the assessment outcome section, really helped us, again, revisit why we were doing it so complicatedly. What do we want to take out? And again, I want to say probably a lot of the changes were, if not most of them, driven by the feedback. So I don't mean to really harp on that, but it really is meaningful feedback that we get because you are the users who complete it. You are the ones engaged in the program review and the planning of your area. So we say all that to encourage feedback when it is your turn and you give us your feedback about how that experience went for you, just to make sure we get responses given, you know, the small sample each term that we get to support. So. And with, you know, if there are no questions, we'll give you 25 minutes of your time back. So you get a break between the next Flex section and ours. And again, really want to thank you for choosing program review training. We really always want to make sure everyone has a chance to know what's happening with program review. It's not a secret or some kind of, oh, that happens, I don't know how it happens. You know, one of the things Research and Equity tries to do in general, just so you know, is really help communicate our college planning processes and not make it feel like a secret. We're trying to document and codify what we do, how we do it, and the ways in which you can be supported in doing it, from the way we communicate deadlines to the transparency of the process in the system. That's definitely a goal of ours because we want everyone to feel like they can participate in planning, given their respective roles. So thanks for joining us and look forward to seeing you later this semester.